Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual plant clinic. Just going to go over a couple of things real quickly while we wait for everybody to get logged in, and then I'll hand it over to David so he can get started. First of all, as always, to those of you who attend regularly or have attended in the past, welcome back. To those of you who are joining us for the first time, we're so glad to have you. I will note very quickly for anybody who's joining outside of the Northern Virginia area, the advice in this class, and like Maryfield Garden Center, we're located in Garden Zone 7. So most of our advice is geared towards that zone. So if you're in California, Canada, New York, somewhere else, just keep that in mind. Your temperatures may be a little warmer or cooler than what we're dealing with here. We are recording today's class, and a recording will go up on YouTube tomorrow. Usually it's by about lunchtime that it's available. We do not send out the recordings by email for this particular type of class that's at the 2 p.m. time slot. So you won't get an email, but you can access the recording on YouTube. If you have questions during the class, please open that Q&A box, type your questions into the Q&A, and David will be taking questions during the class. So I'll be helping relay those questions to him. And I'm about to open up the chat. And if you guys have any issues during the class, please feel free to send me a message and I will assist you as best I can. And with that, David, I will let you get started.
All right. Well, thanks for going through all that with us, Sally. And everybody, thanks for joining us this afternoon. As you know, I like to make this program kind of interactive as possible, kind of conversational, and encourage you to submit questions. So I'm slowly making progress. You know, Sally, just yesterday I learned the difference between the chat and the Q&A. So I'm a little behind the curve, but I'm making progress. So yeah, so put your comments into the Q&A. And I said because I'm going to do things a little bit differently today, because I usually like to stop and start and take questions, but I realize I've got a little bit of an obstacle going on because typically I might bring like 15 slides in, 16 slides, something like that, and have plenty of time for question and answer. So this time I started with about 28 images in my slide set, and I realized that's way too much. I can't cover that in this amount of time. So I took one out and then I put two more in. And I said, no, I just got too much stuff. I need to take something out. So I decided, well, I don't really need to talk about Deodar cedar. I'll take that out. But then I put three more in. And every time I tried to edit my program, it got bigger because we're talking about evergreens today. And there's so much to talk about. There's such a wonderful group of plants. They do so much for us in the landscape. And I wanted to talk a little bit about their growth characteristics, a little about management. I have so much to cover. I'd say, you know what? I'm just going to leave it as is. I've got like 30 slides. I'm going to try to go through it pretty quickly, stay on track to the best of my ability, and then we'll take your questions at the end. So please, throughout the program, put those questions in there, pop them in there, and we're going to have time to look everything over. But considering that situation we're in, I'm going to go ahead and get started right now. All right. So again, evergreens. Like I was saying, these are such critical components of any garden, any landscape. We should say again, we got to have everything. We got to have annuals and perennials, trees, shrubs, evergreen, deciduous, and so on. If you look up here, this from a few years ago was up at Longwood Gardens, and I like to point out, I think this looks like a big spruce in the background, arborvitae over here, wonderful perennial garden in the foreground. I just like to put this in here to show that, hey, these evergreens, they could really provide that structure to the garden, the backbone to it, because again, their presence is there, they're framing the entire image, and providing that beauty year round. So there's a lot of good places to put evergreens. So we could be talking about things like evergreen trees. Again, this is a conifer collection down at Meadowlark Gardens. You see, again, these are public gardens. Not all of us can really have the space or the ability to do this kind of thing in our own backyard, but I think it really illustrates the point where we start to see the diversity up here. And I'm saying the diversity of all the different forms, the shapes, the colors, and so much more that you can continue to play with on this. A lot of times we're just using evergreens just from a functional perspective to provide some type of inclusion that's in there, to define spaces, create a privacy screen. So this is a big thing, of course, in suburban landscapes where we're kind of crowded in between neighbors or up to a shopping center or office park or whatever. And a lot of times we just want to frame that view, get a little enclosure, kind of give us some privacy, both in terms of the view, maybe reduce the noise. So evergreens certainly help us in that environment. And you can do a lot of crazy things with them also. Back to sort of the, back to where we're seeing these topiaries. Now, these are yews that have been topiaried into these kind of, I don't know if those are supposed to be chess pieces or just chicken there kind of stuff. So there's just so many different ways that we can use evergreens, like I said, either to define a space, to accents, create focal points in there, or just to enjoy that year-round beauty or color that's in there. So when we say evergreen, this sometimes, if you're new to gardening, sometimes can be a little bit confusing because evergreens do shed their leaves and needles. That's a normal thing. But what they'll do is they retain some of their needles or leaves throughout the entire year. So it's a very common thing, particularly right now in the month of October. You'll see things like pines and cypress starting to shed their old interior needles that are in there, but they will remain green on the outside. So that's why we call it evergreen, because they do retain some foliage year round, but they also shed some foliage on an annual basis. Just like we see in the little inset here with azaleas. Azaleas are flowering evergreens. And it's normal at this time of year in October, November, that you will see shedding on there. One of the things is when you're looking at evergreens, there are some that are pretty solidly evergreen and hold kind of a dark green color year round. There are some that are deciduous completely and shed every single leaf that's on there. So this is a little bit of doing your homework, knowing what your expectations are, but evergreens do shed. They shed, but they also have some retention of leaves throughout the entire year. So that's just kind of definitions. When I talk about evergreens, I'm going to divide them into one of two very broad groups. And that's going to be either a broadleaf evergreen, like we would demonstrate this holly. So I'm talking about hollies, laurels, boxwoods, many plants in that list. They have this flat leaf on them, and they actually produce a true flower, and that will in turn produce usually a fruit, or a covered seed of some type. So that group of plants we would call angiosperms. The other group that goes in there are going to be needled evergreens. So again, this could be arborvitae. It could be, like I say, cryptomeria, pines, spruce, any of these others. Now, what these do, they have that smaller needle, and also they're going to vary in their growth structure. They don't really produce true flowers. They produce cones. So what they'll do is they produce, you can't see it in this picture, it's the wrong time of year, but this will send up a little shoot, and you'll have male flowers that produce the pollen. You'll have females that then produce the cones. So that's a broadleaf or a needled evergreen. Now, this is more than just the taxonomy on it. I do this because it also influences a lot of how we're going to care and manage these plants. And I'll be giving you a couple examples today. One of the most important ones, I think, are critical to us in terms of gardening is maybe how they respond to pruning. So in this image that you're seeing, these are Nellie Stevens hollies, or actually I looked at that a little closer. This is, I think, a Burford holly, but either way, it's a broadleaf evergreen plant. They got large, they got overgrown. As you can see, they were really basically just cut down to a stump. They were cut down at probably less than 12 inches high through here, and they can regenerate from that because the gymnosperms, the way they are built, their physiology that's in there, they have buds that go up and down the entire stem, They're a lot more forgiving in terms of pruning. So whether it's a holly or an azalea, um, we can prune them back and then they'll regenerate. They'll come back and produce this new growth. So what you're seeing here is kind of an extreme case of this rejuvenation or renewal pruning, but we can do that. The plants give us that kind of resiliency and it gives us those options. So if it's coming over the sidewalk or you want to shape it, sculpt it, all these different kinds of things we like to do with our gardens, we can generally do that on the broadleaf evergreens. Now, the needled evergreen, it's going to be a totally different story. All of their growth comes from these green tips that we see on the top of the plant. So if you get kind of ambitious, like we've seen here, and cut back into the old growth, this will not regenerate. That will not produce new growth. The needled evergreens, they just don't have the buds there. They cannot regenerate. All their growth is coming from these branch tips. So this plant, it's going to recover. It's going to look fine. But what you're going to see over time is that growth is going to generate from this upper layer where we still have the green, but you will not see new growth regenerate from down below. So this is why I say it's important to know our plants, know a little bit on their biology, and again the taxonomy is there. Because let's say you have commons where people plant like a gold mop cypress, beautiful, wonderful, nice little plant, but they grow bigger than what you expect. We talked a little bit about this, I think, last week. Sometimes on the plant tag, you might say, it says, oh, it grows to be about 4 foot by 4 foot. Well, that's true for maybe the first 5 years, but when we start looking further than that, they continue to grow. And so if you let it get too big and it's blocking your view or coming onto the sidewalk, at that point, if you're not maintaining the size on, you might be looking at removing the plant because again, these don't have the ability. You can only trim them in those green tips that are there. So this little sketch that I have coming up kind of illustrates that. So again, we talked about conifers. Conifers, now I'm referring to those that are the cone-bearing plants, the needled ones. The way they're constructed essentially is at this bud. The buds are located right up here, as we talked about. Usually around late spring, the end of April, early part of May, they shoot right up. This is the new growth beginning to emerge from there. If you are a Christmas tree grower, for example, at this time of year, you may come in and trim half of that bud off, and that promotes more branching, more fullness, and gets them denser, so you can shear them at that time of year and shape them. You can do some selective pruning on it, but I must retain these growth buds are on here. If I go back here into the old growth and prune that off, it's not coming back. So again, that happens a lot of times, let's say on pine trees or spruces, where somebody wants to cut the lower limbs off of it. You can do that. The plant continues to grow, but it will never grow back or fill back in where you actually made that cut. So we do treat them differently. And I'm going to put a little bit of an emphasis today on some of the conifers because I think a lot of times they get overlooked in a sense because they don't produce the beautiful flowers and the edible fruits or any of that kind of thing. So sometimes I said they're present, they serve a function, but they also have like their own distinct biology and beauty, and it's really in this color, texture, and form that you can begin to see a little bit in this picture right here. So let's look at some of the more popular varieties that are out there and what we commonly see in our gardens and landscapes. I like starting with arborvitae, the Thuja occidentalis there, sometimes called the white cedar. I go back and I say these were super popular like in my childhood, way back, in those days. This was a common plant that people would put on the corner of a house or building. It's a native plant. If you look at my map here, the distribution map, they are native to Virginia, but generally out in the western counties and the mountainous regions where it's a little bit cooler in temperature. And then you can see them throughout the northeastern part of the U.S. So they're great trees from a lot of different perspectives. This is what I'm saying. They produce a cone. That's the little cone that's on there, after their flowering thing. the deal is with the arborvitaes, you can see they can get to be quite large. And then in the wintertime, they kind of start to turn a little bit of this bronzy brown coloration in there. So while that's just their normal growth cycle and it's got kind of a beauty in its own way, I think as properties got smaller, space got limited, plant breeding is always kind of moving along to enhance and improve. Uh, Eventually, there was a cultivar introduced that's I think it was developed over in Europe. So I can't even say Smargard, or you try to say that name. Uh, that was developed in England and not England, but in Europe. And essentially what it does, it's a more compact growth. These are going to peak out at maybe 15, maybe if you get really old, 20 feet tall. They stay pretty dense. We're talking, we're like 3, maybe 4 feet wide, and they hold their green coloration. So this is let's say, a cultivar or a variety that has these specific qualities that really makes it tremendously useful for us in suburban landscapes. It fits the size of our modern gardens, and the color retention on is great. And then what we'll do in the plant world, we give it a nice name for marketing. So this same plant then gets the name of emerald green arborvitae. And this is also some of the confusion when we talk about plant names, how the same plant ends up with several different names. So different names, same plant, but this is a really phenomenal plant for a lot of our landscapes where we do want things that are going to be 12, 15 feet tall, maybe a little bit larger than that, tight space, but here they're used as a screening type of planting. This between the residence and the highway, and somebody did a really good job of their planting. I just kind of watched this whole thing go in the way they did their planning, their spacing, did all that before the highway construction started. So now the highway's under construction, but they still have their quiet privacy in the backyard. Now, this is a thing. All these plants have their own unique qualities that they offer, and nothing wrong with that. But it's always a good idea to mix things up, do more diverse planting. So this is one of the biggest issues that we run into with the arborvitae, like the emerald green arborvitae, for example, is it's also a favorite for deer browsing that goes in. So when we plant an entire hedgerow of these arborvitae, and I live in a community that has deer available, the damage there can be quite extensive. So we need to know kind of the whole story that's on there. This is also, like I said, they will on occasion get a pest that's called bagworms. I've had a couple people, not many, come in this fall with samples of bagworms on their plants. They will go after others, but again, arborvitae, some of the other evergreens are real favorite to them. So if I just plant a row of 27 arborvitae and I get this pest in there, then I have it on 27 different plants. So let's mix and match these things up for their specific purposes for that specific environment. Try to anticipate some of these headaches as best as we can. If by rare chance, if you actually have these on, you'll find these little cocoons hanging on there, and you'd want to go through right now and remove them, because if it happens to be that that belongs to a female caterpillar, that cocoon would now be full of eggs that are going to hatch out next spring. So cleaning them up and removing them off of there now would be a good way to manage that pest potentially. So we're looking at basically the American arborvitae, Thuja occidentalis. I'm switching gears on you now of looking at the green giant arborvitae. So Thuja plicata is the west coast or western arborvitae, and this one standishii is a European species. And somebody again had the good fortune, good success of hybridizing these two plants together. And that was introduced in the trade many years ago as a green giant arborvitae. Another outstanding evergreen, outstanding conifer that's there. It's really extensively planted here because it's got a really nice form on it. They're a little tighter in their growth than some others. If you consider this to a pine or a spruce, they're more narrow. They have this very upright, conical type of growth habit that's in there. They grow fast. And this is a big thing because we're often using them as a screening plant to give us this privacy. A tree that can grow 2 to 3 feet in a year is a real asset to us. So that's a part of appeal to it. They are much more disease resistant than the other arborvitae, and I see very rarely do I ever see any bagworms on it. So here we've got this wonder plant. It's an arborvitae. It's got this beautiful form to it, evergreen, fast growth rates, and is really showing good resistance to deer and bagworms and other pests. Now, anything can happen in extreme cases, but generally they formed a really good service for us. So the current trend is now, if people are looking for a nice screening, a nice evergreen to partition off between properties, the green giant arborvitae really seems to foot the bill on that. And this is up at I think I know it's the battlefield up in Pennsylvania. Why am I spacing out on that? But where they put it together in a really nice form that's there showing proper use. Part of what's stimulated me towards making this presentation today was last weekend I got into an interesting conversation with one of our customers about the size of this plant. How big does it get? He had been reading, like on our tags, it might say 40 feet tall, but who really knows what mature size is? They haven't been around that long. I think I first started seeing them, we started selling them really probably like 25 years ago. So we don't really have the history. How big will this plant get if we start looking at 40, 50, 60 years out? I thought, well, that's a good question. That's an astute observation, a good argument to make. And I said, well, we don't. So when we talk about plant size, it's always relative to how many years are we talking about? Because plants, trees, I should not say plants, trees, from the day they sprout till the day they die, they're growing. Each year they put on a new layer of growth, and each year they get larger. It might be a small increment of growth, but there's still growing that's in there. So it's sort of hard to talk about. We were looking at a row of them that had been planted maybe 6 feet apart, and then a few years later, they're all growing in and getting real congested with each other. So we say, well, so what do I want to do? Plant them 10 feet apart, 12 feet apart, 15 feet apart? You got to kind of figure out, well, what kind of time frame am I going to work with? How long am I willing to wait to get there? So there's no absolute right answer on this. I think you have to look at in terms of maybe time frames you're looking at. Are we talking about over the next 20 years? So many times we talk about what's going to happen in the next 3 to 5 years. I'm trying to get everybody, hey, what's going to happen over the next 15, 20 years? And if you want to look further out than that, you certainly can. So again, this is what they can do for you. The biggest problem I see with them, I guess I'm saying, is a lot of times they're planted too closely together. They're not allowed room to grow. And then eventually they start growing together, shading each other out, more shade, more competition. And then we start getting more declining performance out of them. But again, that's a wonderful, wonderful plant. And it's fantastic. Like I said, can be used as a specimen, but more often used kind of as a screening plant. So this is Leyland cypress, another large, fast-growing conifer that was extremely popular for many years, and we had the same sort of issues where people planting them closely together, weren't really thinking what's going to happen if it's growing 3 feet a year, and then we oftentimes would run into trouble. But when they're correctly spaced and planted, it can really be a beautiful evergreen tree to define that corner or provide a little bit of that enclosure that's there. So that's Leyland cypress. Here they are planted together, closely spaced into this sort of a hedge, providing that same kind of screening that goes on. And I might like to spread them a little further out, but then I'm more patient than a lot of people to do that, giving them room to grow. One of the things that you can see that's a little different on the Leyland cypress, you see how these branches kind of have this sort of upward growth pattern on it. So they do spread out, they get wider and fatter than the green giants do. Here they are planted side by side. So you can see, again, the growth pattern is a little different on there. Otherwise, they look pretty similar to each other in a lot of ways, and similar sort of purposes in a landscape. Here, I don't know if this was intentional or just accidental, but that's how it happens. So here I've got my green giants, a little softer texture, a little more narrow growth rate right next to the Leyland cypress. So here's the thing we started to learn, and this often happens, years, decades later after we put plants out in the landscape. We start learning more about them as we go. I think the big thing that happened with Leyland cypress is back when we had the snowmageddon. Can't remember how many years that was, but we back to back we had two very heavy snowstorms. That was heavy, wet, dense snow that's on there. And what became apparent was because of the branching habit on those, the Leyland cypress, that upright growth habit, they seem to actually capture the snow. The snow would collect on those branches. And then a lot of times the ground was wet from the storm and wet conditions. And the weight of that snow was then starting to pull these trees over. If you look at the green giant, they have that different kind of branching habit, and they tend to shed the snow. That snow kind of starts to flake off with them. Also, because the Leyland cypress has been so extensively planted, what happens is, again, they get this disease, fungal infection called Ceridium canker, goes in, causes these branches to die back, and then it gradually progresses until you get more and more dieback that's in that. And so it also brings up this issue where if I planted a big row of 50 of them or something, then that disease is going to spread throughout. So that's just never a good plan. But following that episode where we had the big snow, started seeing some problems on the Leyland cypress, still a great plant, still useful, but they've kind of being passed over largely in favor of the green giant arborvitae. And there's new varieties coming out all the time. So then there's like a junior giant that's even a smaller, more compact form. I think there's sort of some that have kind of a golden color. So you're always going to see a lot of options that are out there. Eastern red cedar. This is our native red cedar. Again, always an amazing plant. It was sometimes dismissed because it's so widespread, so common throughout this area, throughout the whole eastern US and North America, you can see there. Again, but it's a really important plant as far as provides shelter, and it's a good food source for wildlife. It also provides that dense cover that's in there, that for privacy, for enclosure that's in there. They grow fast, and with the interest in native plants, that's making a big resurgence now. A lot of times what we're selling now, we do have just with straight species available for people who are strictly native. There are some that are very columnar and upright now that I love. It's called Taylor's juniper. Same plant, but very skinny, upright form where we don't have space. There's some that have a little more of this blue-green color to them. So again, that's just in the industry. We start looking at those things. Another big, fast one that you can use either as a specimen, that we can see these are pictures from down the Lewis Ginter Botanic Garden, or the others I took out at American University on their campus. So here it's planted as a specimen where you can really see the texture and the shape of it. Again, or they can be planted in groupings to provide that screening that's there. They don't grow quite as fast, which is why maybe they're not quite as popular, but a plant that's well worth including your garden. And they have miniature dwarf ones. I mean, I live in a townhouse, as that a lot of you know, and I have a cryptomeria plant in my front yard, but there's a miniature one that's still under 6 feet tall, and that's after it's been in the ground for probably 15 years. So broadleaf evergreens, switching gears, because we do have some trees, southern magnolia, which we all love, those really large, white, fragrant blossoms that are on there. They can get to be quite large. So it's on an old one. It's not unusual to see it 20, 25 feet wide, 40 feet tall, and they can go larger than that if they're given enough time and space to do that. Now, there's been a lot of different hybrids that are developed. So real quick, showing my little distribution map. I forgot to put this in there. Again, to me, it has a little bit of an interesting story because I always thought that this was a Virginia native tree, and for many years it was identified as a Virginia native tree. But with more and more research and more learning, and we've now realized the thing is we don't have the historic records to document that. So there's a thinking that this tree may well have been introduced to Virginia from states further south. But still, they do wonderfully here in Virginia. We are kind of pushing the northernmost limits on them, but it's a great evergreen flowering tree to put into our gardens. And there's been a lot of developments in these, like many different varieties. Alta's a little more upright one where it doesn't spread out as wide, kind of goes straight up. Little gem, this causes a lot of confusion because it's considered a small form of the magnolia, but it can still grow to be 30 feet tall. It's just smaller than the parent tree, so it's always kind of relative. But that's a great one to have good density. It flowers early and it doesn't get ginormous. And then there's teddy bear, which is probably the smallest of them all. I'm pretty sure that one, again, we don't have as much history on, but probably going to stop at about 15 feet plus or minus. Again, like to encourage planting of natives wherever we can, and I absolutely love American hollies. So if we look at this one, that's kind of the natural form of an American holly. They'll grow with a fair amount of shade, but when they're in a shaded environment that does have a more open, irregular type of form to it, that's going to be naturally thin. And people sometimes get a little frustrated with the American holly because it tends to be a slower grower. It's not going to provide us that kind of screening or privacy as quick and may not be quite as dense. Now, on the flip side here, you see Cedar Hill, which is a cultivated variety. It's been nursery produced, has better density to it, fullness, more uniform in its shape. And then you can see this one's growing where it gets a little more sunlight, so we're getting a little better growth, more density out of it. But again, it's a beautiful native tree, evergreen tree, does produce the berries that we'll obviously be seeing a lot of at Christmas time, and works well in kind of almost woodland, woodsy settings where it can get at least half a day of sun. If you put in full shade, they live, but they're real spindly looking. So I keep talking about this, the importance of having a diverse community of plants. There's so many good reasons for that. Diverse collection of plants is more diverse food sources for wildlife that's out there. It's more interesting to you and me to look at. You can get different bloom seasons, different colors, textures, a lot of good reasons to do it. But also, like we're seeing, that way, if one of them may be more susceptible to a temperature extreme, so you might get severe cold or drought stresses are out there, insect disease stresses. The more diversity we have, the more resilience we have in that garden or that landscape. So just like here, you can see this is a Nellie Stevens holly. It's a hybrid between a Chinese and an English, super vigorous that's in there. This is that emerald green arborvitae, cultivar of our native, they call white cedar, but it's actually the arborvitae Thuja occidentalis, mixed in with some evergreen shrubs. That's a good way to start creating these balances. Hey, putting in, of course, some deciduous plants, summer flowering blooms. But I found that there's something like the American Association of Landscape Architects sort of have this as a starting point, as these rules don't take that as a rigid rule, consider it more of a guideline kind of rule. But where they say no more than 10% of any one species, no more than 20% of any one genera, and no more than 30% of one family, I thought that was a pretty good guide. So the thing is, like Nellie Stevens is wonderful, but if you have a monoculture and we get severe bitter cold, all of those can get damaged. If you get cottony camellia scale, which does infect hollies, they all get infected. So let's try to mix that up. This is an example of what I'm going to call a diverse screening. I thought somebody did a really nice job on this. So you can see Nellie Stevens hollies in here, green giant arborvitaes. These are some evergreen viburnums put in there, mixed in with some existing deciduous trees. So I'm standing in front of a townhouse community. This is a noisy highway that's out there. I stand and wait for breaking traffic to get my pictures. And let's see, that was 2020. Here's 2024. If I was to go out there and get an update today, that background, the highway's just about disappeared. So they've spaced them appropriately, good plant selection, put them into room to grow, and that's what they got in over a period of 4 years. Couple shrubs, because I want to leave time for question and answers. So we don't have a lot of native evergreen shrubs to work with. So one that's been real popular, a lot of people is the inkberry. This is a type of holly. It is an evergreen shrub type holly. I like to point out though, where you see them is growing more down these coastal areas, sort of this southeastern part of Virginia. And that's where they really thrive. We grow these plants up here in Northern Virginia, but they don't always do quite as well. You know, sometimes they get, where I say, a little bit leggier, they lose some of the density at the bottom of their growth and everything. So they're being increasingly utilized. A lot of people talk about putting them into wet, poorly drained areas. I think it's a little more nuanced than that. They grow in wet, poorly drained areas down in this region, but those are sandy soils. If I put them in wet, poorly drained clay soils up here, I see problems with it. So again, I think it's a great plant, has its landscape, but sometimes they were a little oversimplify some of the situations where we use it. Northern bayberry, again, it's a wonderful Virginia native evergreen. These can grow quite large, but you can also easily prune them, shape them however you need to. I love these plants. Again, they get the bayberries, I think bayberry candles and everything that we enjoy during the holidays and that fragrance. Again, look at this though. They're down in this kind of coastal region where we tend to have sandier soils. So they will grow in wetland areas, but that's even in a sandy soil. If I put this plant into a very wet area up in Northern Virginia with dense clay, they're not going to perform quite as well. So we can either take some measures in just how we site them or how we condition the soil. I think this is going to be my last one or close to it, and then we can take questions. We've certainly gone the other corner of the planet. Nothing native about this. You can see Japanese plum. I put it in here because this is, I think, such a sturdy, reliable landscape plant. I recommend these to gardeners all the time because I'm looking for things that are going to perform well, perform easily. This is a plant that can grow in sun or shade. Again, they are deer resistant. We have an extremely good success rate with them. There's different forms. You can see that's why I put a picture of an upright growing one, kind of intermediate ones. There's a spreading type. There are even some that have a little bit of a yellowish cast to it. So we've got some varieties to work with. The thing that somewhat limits their popularity is they're going to be slow growing. I don't look at that as a bad thing. When you say slow growing, I say easy maintenance. Because otherwise, if I say slow growing, people are like, oh, I don't have time for that. I'm not getting any younger. But yeah, if you put something that's growing fast in there, you're going to just be doing more pruning on it to maintain its size. Distilium, another relatively new plant, Asian introduction. They did some breeding with these down in Georgia. We've been carrying them several years. I think the little hedge that you're looking at here has probably been in the front of our garden for 4 or 5 years now. So it's withstood some pretty bad winters. I was a little concerned with cold hardiness, but they've actually turned out to be pretty reliable. And those, like I said, we've got different varieties, some that kind of upright, some that spread, intermediate, all those kind of things. So I want to encourage everybody to look around your landscape, see where you might want to add some evergreens. And this is a very good time to be planting them, but I've got a little video that I want to kind of show you just to wrap things up.
Go.
Fall is just such a wonderful season to be outside, enjoying the weather, the cooler temperatures, the beautiful color that surrounds us. And it's also a fantastic time to be planting trees, shrubs, pretty much anything else in your garden. Now, the reality of it is you can plant any time of year. You can plant in spring, summer, fall, or winter, but whenever you do this, you pretty much own the watering for the first year as those roots are getting established. That's why we ask you to periodically go outside, check on your plants, make sure the root ball is moist. If it's not, then we want you to water it. And that's going to hold true pretty much year round, especially with the evergreens. So this is what I'm talking about today. Evergreens, they continue to transpire. They're taking water up through the roots and they're losing it through their foliage. And this goes on all year long. So with evergreens, because they have that foliage, we have to have a plan in place even as we go into the winter months. We expect to get rain, sleet, snow, and ample moisture through the winter, and we want to take advantage of that. But there's always that occasional dry spell that occurs. So we want you to continue checking on the plants, and you kind of need to have a plan in place to water if needed. Now on broadleaf evergreens like this magnolia, they have this large leaf surface and they're taking water up through the roots, losing it through the leaves in a process called transpiration. This bigger leaf, the larger leaf surface like you find on magnolias, laurels, hollies, and others, they have a higher transpiration rate. They have more surface area and a greater tendency towards drying out if they don't get adequate moisture. If you look at a needled evergreen, which could be spruces, junipers, or in this case I'm looking at a pine, they have a different architecture where it's a very skinny, narrow leaf blade with much less surface area on. So they tend to be a little more drought resistant, but we still need to keep an eye on it. So by all means, go out, enjoy the fall season, plant your trees, your shrubs, but especially with evergreen trees and shrubs, I just want you to make sure you have a plan in place, check on if you ever encounter dry conditions, be prepared to go out and do some hand watering.
Go.
All right. We got through all that stuff together. Thanks. I hope you stuck with me. And Sally, do we have any questions in
We
the
sure do. Everybody, please feel free to send those in. We'll get through as many as we can. I'm going to sneak one in real quick that came in right at the beginning, David. For those who are worried about their lawns, is it too late for them to see their lawns?
No, I want you to do it as soon as possible. The thing that's holding us up, of course, is the lack of rainfall. But right now, our soil temperature is still warm enough. The seed will still germinate, but it's a function of temperature and moisture. So you pretty much just need to commit to watering.
Gotcha. Okay. Alrighty. Next question. On to our evergreens. Can you discuss candling for pruning?
Yeah, so candling, I had showed, I had a little picture it shows in there the way that evergreens grow. They have what they call a growth spurt or a candle that comes up. So this is usually like around, like right in late April, that terminal bud starts to elongate out. And when it does, it literally looks like a candle because you got these skinny little top coming up. And the way that terminal bud, it looks like a little candle that's there. Now, the candles, that's the new growth for the coming year. You can, if you want to, like I was saying, a Christmas tree growers, they go out and they shear those trees to cut those tips. They don't remove them, but they might cut 50% off of it. And that causes the growth to be a little bit stunted, but that's also how you get a very full, dense look on the tree. Sometimes people might choose to just thin them out. So if I have like 3 little candles coming up, maybe I prune 2 of them off. I don't know exactly why you would do that, but so candling is during that candle season that they call when those new shoots are emerging. You can either tip all of them off, some of them off. You can cut a third of it off or cut 50% off. So you can play around with that, and that's really just going to influence the density, the shape, the fullness of the plant. But that's really the only way that you can plant prunes a lot of these conifers is at that time of the year.
Okay. Did the weather affect the Nellie Stevens holly this year? Some of the leaves on mine are brown, and I'm not sure if the limb is dead.
You might be looking a little bit of drop damage. I said, we had so much rain all the way through the end of July, but then in August, things just dried up. And even though we've had some rain showers since that time, it's not where it should be, not where we'd like it to be right now. So because you're saying browning, I'm thinking that that's not like a seasonal shedding or anything. That's probably a little desiccation. I would check the soil moisture. Probably a slow, deep water is the best thing you could do right now.
Okay. What are your thoughts on dawn redwoods or bald cypress, specifically the dwarf bald cypress?
I love those trees. I love both of them. They're both conifers, but they're not evergreen. They shed their leaves. A lot of people dislike them because in the fall they kind of go this rusty brown color from yellow and then shed. And I've had so many people, I still remember many years ago, some new homeowners had this magnificent dawn redwood in their backyard, but they had it taken down because it looked like it's dying. I feel like, hey, let's not make judgments. Look, it's got beautiful shape, beautiful texture. They'll grow fast, especially if you get some moisture to it. I know 2 of our nurseries here at Fair Oaks and also at Merrifield. That's been our tree that we planted on the property, provide a little bit of shade for some of the others. Bald cypress again is fantastic. A native tree looks very, very similar in its growth characteristics and habits. It's the one that will grow even in swampy areas. It produces the knees, the little shoots come up. So especially well suited for wet, poorly drained areas. So yeah, we carry both of those. And I agree, there's are some miniature ones. There's some that have a little bit of a golden color to it. Extremely reliable, durable trees, and they have their own unique character.
Alrighty. What evergreen would you recommend for shade and deer resistance? We love our plum yews. Are there any others?
Yeah, well, plum yew, like I said, that's my go-to plant in that environment. Of to some extent of deer will browse on hollies, not as much as some other plants. So like an American holly might be something to consider. There is a variety that's called Maryland that's much more of a low growing, spreading shrub type of holly. So I keep saying this word shade tolerant. They're not going to grow in really heavy, dense shade. If you can open up the canopy, do some thinning to get some sunlight in there, they'll do even better. If we start looking beyond that, there are some plants like thinking like the skip laurels, autoleucon laurels. They're surprisingly shade tolerant, generally deer resistant, though again, the deer may sometimes occasionally browse on them. But that's kind of it. Little bit rhododendrons, but to me, rhododendrons and mountain laurels, they can be a little fussy to deal with as far as establishment, the drainage, that kind of thing. But they are considered to be like shade tolerant and deer resistant.
All right. Let's see. Okay, we have a couple more deer resistant questions. Let me start with those since we're on deer resistance. Are white pines deer resistant, and do they do well in afternoon sun?
Yeah, so white pines definitely is a sun-loving plant.
Okay.
They want, when I say that, I'm talking about 5 hours minimum of direct sun, and more is better. That's in there. Generally, deer
Same.
resistant.
Oh, sorry.
Again, I always say this generally, we have to qualify everything because nature's just not black and white this there.
How hungry are they?
Pines are tough. They will eat them up. So
Okay.
otherwise, good choice.
Okay. Same questions for the dwarf Colorado blue spruce. Deer resistance, afternoon sun.
Deer resistant afternoon sun. Yes, absolutely. Okay. I think of them as sometimes our heat that we get here, like we're at 95, 100, 105. The heat will put some stress on them. But otherwise, pretty reliable. The plant's well adapted to a lot of different conditions. Sun loving, deer resistant, though, yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, moving on. I have an emerald green dwarf arborvitae in a container next to my front door. Let's see. She's had it for a year and wants to know if it needs any specific care. Some of the lower limbs died in the late summer, so she was wondering if it had had too much water. And recommendation she's been given her, let it dry to half the depth of the pot. Is that accurate? Does it need fertilizer? Maybe can you address this for evergreens and pots generally, if anybody's got that?
Yeah. So anytime something's in a pot above ground, and you can certainly do this, but you have to realize it's exposed to both temperature and moisture extremes. It's kind of like an artificial environment. So those plants would be the larger the pot, the larger the volume of soil it has, the larger rooting it has, the better the insulation. So if you can, usually a larger pot size makes life a lot easier for you and the plant. I kind of agree with what they're saying. Let it dry down at least the top half to 3/4 of the pot. Let that get where it's really dry, but never reaching the point of complete dryness. When you get to that halfway, 3/4, then we want to soak it. We want to drench it really thoroughly until it's totally 100% saturated. Let it dry down, then saturate it again. So we don't want to keep it constantly wet or moist. We want to saturate it, dry down about, like we said, at least halfway, and then saturate it again. Keep it a little sheltered this winter because it is in a pot, so it's more exposed to temperature extremes. Again, they can take really cold temperatures, but it doesn't hurt to put a little extra insulation around there just to help protect the roots a bit. I'm going to guess from your very quick description, it may have just gotten a little bit on the dry side of things. Of I don't associate that browning at the bottom with being excessively wet.
Okay.
The others, if it's not getting enough sunlight, if it's in a shady environment, you'll get some browning and shedding on the lower branches.
Okay. Okay. Let's see here. Next question. I'm planting a berm for screening to prevent oh gosh, drivers backing into her grass. Okay. It's a part sun area and she needs ideas for evergreens for the berm. She likes a mixed border. It's going to be 20 to 25 feet long and 4 feet wide. Do you have any ideas?
So you've got a big area to work there. I mean, ideally, the best thing is like, hey, bring some pictures in and talk to some of our salespeople and everything. They can show you around some good ideas that are there. I don't know if this is right area, but I told you I'm kind of enamored with this plant, this Distilleum. It's a broadleaf evergreen. The thing is, like I said, we're a little concerned about its cold hardiness, but it seems to be performing quite well for us. Totally pest free that's in there. And you can get some that might grow 6 or 8 feet tall. You can get some that stay like 3, 4 feet tall. So there's a lot to choose from. And you want to mix it up. Like I said, you might have some broadleaf evergreens mixed in with some of the conifers that we talked about. Do them in groupings. Don't ever like stagger either one. Just put some groupings in it. Nice thing I'm going to say about some of the broadleaf evergreens is now no plant wants the car backing into it, but like if you were to back into the Distilleum, it can actually regrow. It can grow back from that if it gets damaged. If you're putting like a cypress in there and somebody backs into it, breaks a branch, you're just left with a broken branch.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, the Distilleum, we actually have a question about that one, so that's perfect. My Distilleum has been great until this year. They took a major hit last winter. I'm worrying about planting now versus spring because we may have another harsh winter. When should I plant new Distilleum?
Well, that's what I was trying to say with that video a little bit. Fall is our planting. That's been like a slogan in the industry for decades. And that's a true statement because, hey, cooler temperatures, you expect more ample moisture. It's a nice time to be out, good time to get roots established. But we now have winter droughts and winter dry spells. It may not meet the definition of a drought. And this is my concern. It's not so much the cold temperatures. Now, you can just get cold damage. We're selling some plants a little bit marginal. We get down into single digits like we did last year. You can see that, but 90% of the winter damage I see is because they weren't getting enough moisture. And like I said, on a broadleaf plant, like that Distilleum has a larger leaf surface. I would say this is a good time to plant it, but you must be prepared to do some watering in the winter. And I find, okay, it's wintertime, it's not in your mind, your water's shut off, it's dry, and that's where we get into some trouble. So unless you can commit to the watering, unless you are really committed to doing this, I lecture people, I not think about doing it, but actually doing it, then I'd rather see you plant those next spring.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. I have a row of skip laurel. All appear to be afflicted with shot hole disease. Is there anything I can do or should do now to treat them? Will it eventually be eradicated with proper care?
So the shot hole disease, that doesn't kill plants. It's ugly, it's unsightly, it's a nuisance, but it's not life or death. There's really not much that you could do now. That's something you would want to treat next spring. So what will happen is, let's say they flower for you in April and then they start growing in May, you would want to do some preventative fungicide applications at the beginning of that growth cycle. So we're talking about sometime in sort of early May, probably about time, late April, early May. We've had some pretty good results treating with copper fungicide. You may have to spray it 2 or 3 times during that early spring growth to prevent the reinfection. But otherwise, it's going to be kind of a persistent issue on the laurels. It doesn't spread everywhere. It really goes to cherries and cherry laurels.
Okay. Okay, this question came in this may be related to the shot hole disease. What about camellias? Is that a thing for camellias?
So again, the shot hole disease is for cherries and cherry laurels.
Okay.
Camellias, we really don't have disease problems. Now, everything I just said to you about the Distillium also holds true with the camellias. They've been bred for many, many years, so they're much more reliably cold hardy in our environment. We've also, by the way, we've warmed up by half a zone. So that combination of kind of warmer temperatures, hardier plants, they have proven themselves to be real well, good, solid performers in our area. But if I'm planting one, I need to be prepared to water. If we get enough rain, sleet, and snow to keep the ground moist, they'll kind of take care of themselves. But more and more, I feel like, I haven't checked numbers, but I feel like we get more rain in July than we get moisture in January. And that's like a flip flop. It was never like that before, but that's why I'm changing my messaging and saying, you just got to make sure that you're able to keep them watered.
Okay.
That's the thing that you got to watch.
Okay. Do you have any evergreen recommendations for a north-facing, part shady lakeshore?
You might be doing really well, like I said, the inkberry and bayberry, like, because if you're on kind of that sandy or shoreline soil, those are plants, that's where they naturally grow. And they've got really good resistance to like salt tolerance and even, I say, wet conditions, but it's strange. They behave differently when you see them down those coastal areas of sandy soil than they do in our clay soil. But um, that might be a good one for you to look at,
Okay.
those environments.
All right. Um, let's see here. Do you have, okay, these are all recommendations, so we'll see if we can get through these for in the last couple minutes.
Okay.
Do you have recommendations for a low evergreen, full sun, and it's going to go at the end of a driveway?
So some of our junipers, I don't know if we can see it. I brought a couple like ground cover type junipers. This is one's called the Blue Pacific. There's other varieties. I just kind of like that color and texture. It's a little bit softer. But there's a lot of low spreading junipers that, again, because they're needled, once they get their roots established, they've got incredible heat and drought tolerance. So if you have the asphalt around sidewalk, full environment, and they stay low, like, these will stay under 12 inches tall.
Okay. Okay, next one. Evergreen in a pot, concrete porch, morning only sun.
Uh, a personal favorite of mine is, I really love the Hinoki false cypress or Chamaecyparis, and there are some of them that are very small. You even sell them like in our miniature garden area, and I'll take some of those. You can get sort of rounded ones, upright ones, gold color, green. There are surprisingly shade tolerant. They want to, if they have very, very bright indirect light, they don't even need any direct sun on them, but they do need at least a very bright indirect light. I love their sculpted look, the little different color changes. They're very easy, reliable plants. I think in my little townhouse garden, again, we have very little space, somehow I managed to work in like 3 different forms of Hinoki cypress. Cryptomeria, there's some miniature ones of those, but that's kind of like a second choice based on personal preference.
Okay. Do you have any, this is the last question. Do you have any evergreen recommendations? Oh, we got more. Okay, guys, these are the last two because we're about out of time, but we'll do these two. Evergreens for wet areas in addition to the bald cypress. Do you have any others that can handle that?
So the bald cypress is not an evergreen. It's a great plant.
Sorry, yes, a conifer. Is it a conifer?
It is a conifer, but it's a deciduous conifer. So
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say the birds are always all over the one at my old house, so I always figured it had cones or something.
so it's a little bit of an anomaly. If I can't speak now, I've been talking for
So maybe an actual evergreen.
yeah. That's tough because, again, everybody, I hear this all the time, like the inkberries, they're planted in rain gardens and stuff. I'm just not really on board with that, as I told you. So northern exposure weddings, no, I'm kind of coming up blank on that. I have to think about that.
Okay. Maybe
That's
call us and we'll have some ideas maybe.
yeah, that's a tough one to fill.
Okay. Okay. Um, Front door, okay, northern exposure and no direct sun. Tried everything. Oh, well, what about the the Hinoki cypress you were talking about that didn't need direct sun?
It doesn't need direct sun, but it does need very
Right, like,
bright indirect light. Like so,
gotcha.
I'm thinking like if my house, it might be light that's reflected off of the siding or something like that. If you put them in dense shade, they kind of thin out. I don't know what size you're looking for exactly, but a plant I was just thinking of, I think I've had really good luck with in dry, shady environments of like competing under trees and everything. Is the sweet box sarcococa? It's related to the boxwood, but we're talking about 2-3 feet high at maturity, and it kind of spreads out like, as I say, a shrublet kind of form. But they'll do surprisingly well in those kind of environments. Might be something
Okay.
to look at.
Okay, great. All right, well, that's our last question, David. Everybody, thank you so much. Remember, the recordings will be available. Feel free to call the store, send me an email if you have any questions. And David, do you want to wrap up with anything before we close?
No, just thank you for joining us and sticking with us, and come down and visit me and everybody else here at Merrifield Garden Center as soon as you can.
All righty, well, thank you guys. Have a good afternoon. Bye, David.
Okay, bye, Sally.